CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. The United States sends troops to Europe as one of its generals says conflict in Ukraine would be horrific. Russia denies plans to invade. The UK's Prime Minister is to visit the Ukraine region and will talk to Russia's President Putin. Boris Johnson says he wants to ramp up deterrence to avoid bloodshed. And 2 weeks after the volcanic eruption and tsunami, how Fiji has become the focus for Tonga's international aid efforts. The senior United States general has described the prospect of any Russian invasion of Ukraine as horrific. This as the US is sending a small deployment of American troops to Europe. Russia is yet to formally respond to US proposals for a diplomatic solution to the border crisis after Washington earlier rejected its security demands. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Natalie Carney in Ukraine. Natalie, what's the mood among the public there?
Well, there has been some movement in the last 24 hours that could be deemed, more towards an onset of war, such as you've mentioned, American troops being sent to Eastern Europe. As well, we're also hearing that Russia is sending more military power to Belarus. And even there's some reports and some media sources saying that spare blood supplies are being sent to soldiers in border areas by Moscow. However, as far as the feel here in Kiev and in Ukraine in general, it seems to be relatively calm and relaxed. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, yesterday said to the general public through a press conference not to panic, and even accused the West of sort of inciting fear amongst the population and not to over-exaggerate the situation. Vladimir Zelensky said that he does not feel any more tensions now than he has over the last 8 years that Ukraine has been in this ongoing war with Russia. And let's not forget how much that has kind of made people somewhat apathetic to the situation. So there is a relative calm amongst the people. For centuries even, they've been having this back and forth with Russia. So while there is this movement we're seeing, it seems the U.S. and the West is a little bit more concerned about the potential of war than those that I've at least spoken to here in Ukraine.
And a previous conflict many years ago with Russia being commemorated in Kiev today.
Yeah, there was a few dozen people who gathered in the famous Maidan Square here in central Kiev in memory of students who fought against the Red Army back in 1918 in what was dubbed the Battle of Kiev, when Soviet powers at the time tried to take over the country. Russia had already taken over other governance across Ukraine, and now it was aiming for Kiev. They did end up winning that particular battle and overthrowing the government here. But it's interesting that all these years later, more than 100 years later, the country is still dealing with tensions with Russia. Some would say, wanting to overthrow the government here again. So, but again, a lot of Ukrainians that we've spoken to, the mood here, the president is trying to also calm the mood and any potential panic that may erupt amongst the population and try to keep things relatively calm.
Natalie, thanks for that. Natalie Carney, our correspondent in Ukraine. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is due to visit the Ukraine region. He's also due to speak to Russia's President Vladimir Putin to urge him to step back from confrontation. But Johnson has problems of his own at home, with a report soon to be published on illegal lockdown parties in Downing Street. Let's talk to our correspondent Andrew Wilson, who's following the story for us. Andrew, what does Boris Johnson hope to achieve with his visit to the Ukraine region?
Well, I think, Jamie, he's putting his head above the parapet because that's what the Americans require. There's a NATO agreement that Germany is going fairly softly on this. France, softer still. Britain and the US are the ones making the most noise, shaking a few sticks. Not big ones, but certainly being the figures to stand up. Now, it's worth remembering that Vladimir Putin's been doing this since George Bush was president and Tony Blair was prime minister, so he has a fair amount of experience in terms of the chessboard of European and geopolitics, and so he's quite a formidable foe when it comes up to the brinkmanship that they're seeing now on the eastern border of Ukraine. Boris Johnson's wading in. He says he wants to accelerate diplomatic efforts. He wants to ramp up deterrence to avoid bloodshed. Whether or not he gets this phone call with Vladimir Putin has yet to be confirmed, and which part of the Ukraine region he actually goes to has also yet to be confirmed. Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, is slated down to go to Ukraine next week, and then after that go on to Moscow for talks with her counterpart in the Russian government, Sergei Lavrov. But it's not clear again how scheduled or written down in stone those meetings are. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, is scheduled to go to the Czech Republic. He's also going to go to Hungary and a couple of other Eastern European countries to firm up support there for the NATO position. It's all about brinkmanship at the moment. It's not clear yet who's going to be able to make any difference to the impasse that's on the ground at the moment.
And what other action is the UK government proposing to take?
So the UK has already been part of a bit of a military kerfuffle. It's sent some weaponry publicly, very publicly, calling the journalists to film these anti-tank weapons yesterday on the planes outside Kiev. They've sent some weaponry and a few trainers, just a handful of UK military trainers as well, on the ground to show the Ukrainian troops how to work this kit. It's putting more store, I think, in the threat of sanctions. It looks like the UK is going to come up with a new raft of sanctions at the beginning of next week that it's going to target at Russian individuals, but already there are concerns about how effective that would be. It's thought about $2 billion worth of investment has already made its way into London and beyond in the UK from Russian billionaires, putting their money where they feel it's safer than into the Russian economy. That money is unaccounted for. It's not clear who's actually at the source of that investment. $1.5 billion worth of property bought by shell companies that they're not clear exactly who's at the source of that money as well. So already the Americans are saying they're worried that London's going to be able to actually effectively pinpoint individuals. It may go after individuals in the Russian government, but may have problems actually locating their assets. They are trying to activate something called an unexplained wealth order, which is asking foreign companies here to explain who's at source of the wealth that's buying properties in the UK, but that hasn't really got off the ground that much. And this year there's an economic crimes bill going to be published by the government, which again is going to look into more accountability and transparency in terms of foreign investors buying property in the UK. But that's down the line. But there is a certain willingness to those sanctions that the government's promising for this week.
Andrew, the Prime Minister's critics will simply say this is all a useful distraction from political problems at home.
It's not a bad one. I mean, the possibility of war in Central Europe ain't a bad way to draw the attention away from your problems at home. How much of it is by design and how much of it is by accident is not exactly clear. Obviously, the Prime Minister's keen now to be associated with Ukrainian geopolitics. He's got these two reports lurking in the background, one from Sue Gray, senior civil servant, much publicised investigation that's been going on for longer than a month now into these various allegations of parties and other gatherings in Downing Street and other government buildings. Added to that, this extraordinary U-turn we saw last week from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Dame Cressida Dick, saying that she's also now launching an investigation, and that overlaps with the civil service investigation, and that complicates how these reports are going to come out, because there's a concern that if Sue Gray, the senior civil servant, publishes her complete report this week, for example, she may tread on the toes of some of the things that the Metropolitan Police would like to investigate themselves. So we may find ourselves in the situation now where the Prime Minister gets presented with a report from Sue Gray, some of which, or a lot of which, has been redacted till later, in other words, blanked out because she doesn't want to spoil the police investigation, and then perhaps ministers saying publicly, well, we have to wait for the police investigation now, and that could take weeks or even months. There's no sign or time limit on that investigation. So the Prime Minister has bought himself a lack of momentum amongst those who are trying to pursue either his demise or removal from office by going after these two reports. He's bought himself a lull, which may mean that the public and the political body actually lose interest over time.
And presumably an intensification of any international crisis makes it much more difficult for his own MPs to force him out.
I think there's a loyalty issue. And if you remember David Cameron taking the decision to bomb Libya, 2 houses of parliament, there's a time when you need both parties to rally round and make important decisions. Now, if Eastern Europe does develop into something really akin to an international crisis where lives may be lost or the firepower is being started up in different sides of borders, then you can't have a parliament arguing amongst itself about issues over Brexit, for example, let alone the Prime Minister's integrity or his reliability in office. So that may solidify as well a political direction from which the UK may suddenly turn and go in a new direction. There is a lot for the government to worry about at the moment, not only the issues of Ukraine. There are local elections coming up in May. There's a cost of living crisis. There's a tax bombshell they want to launch in April as well to try and pay for more money into the healthcare system. There are all sorts of things down the line that the government really needs a clear head to deal with and sell to the British public. And so that may, ironically, in effect, make the crisis go away of Boris's reputation without him having to actually put much effort in that direction.
Andrew, thanks for that. Andrew Wilson, our correspondent. Far-right party leaders have been holding a summit in Madrid on the future direction of Europe. The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki and France's Marine Le Pen were welcomed to the Spanish capital by the leader of Spain's Vox party, Santiago Abascal. They said they wanted to provide an alternative to the globalist drift that threatens the European Union. 2 weeks after the devastating volcanic eruption in Tonga, the country is trying to get back on its feet. 750 kilometers away, Fiji has become the focus for international aid deliveries bound for the island nation. Our correspondent Greg Navarro has the story.
Here at the port in Suva, which has become extremely busy over the last 48 hours. That's because all of the supplies, all of the aid that's being collected here at Fiji's capital is brought to this port and loaded onto ships and is being loaded. In the case of the ship behind me, I'm going to step out of the way so you can see. We're going to tell you a little bit about the organization that is running this ship in just a few moments, but they are dealing with some logistical issues because the pallets that are on the ground still have to go on top of the ship. They've got a crane there to try to figure it out. In fact, logistics is something that pretty much all aid organizations are dealing with in trying to get supplies to Tonga. Not only is there a great unknown in just how much damage has happened to the infrastructure there, but they're also dealing with concerns about COVID. They will then probably late tonight board that ship. It will sail for 3 days, get to the port in Tonga where they will quickly unload, as I mentioned, as contactless as possible, all of those supplies, jump back on that ship for another 3-day journey back here to Suva, and the quarters on board are tight to say the least. All right, so we know that these ships are going. We also know there is another ship on the way. It should arrive in Tonga on Sunday. That's significant because it is the ship that will repair that single communication cable that was cut, the undersea cable that was cut by the volcano. We're told that it could take up to 2 weeks. They have to first assess the damage. We understand it was broken or cut in a couple of places and then start that repair work. That is critical to allowing Tonga to communicate to the rest of the world. They haven't had internet access. Getting international phone calls through has been extremely difficult. That's why they're racing to get that undersea cable repaired. As I mentioned, once they're there, once they're established and they've assessed it, it could take up to 2 weeks.
Our correspondent Greg Navarro reporting from Fiji. Meanwhile, Peru says the oil spill off its coast earlier this month is worse than previously thought. Nearly 12,000 barrels of oil was leaked, almost double the initial estimate of 6,000 barrels. The spill happened when an oil tanker was hit by the waves from Tonga's volcanic eruption. An investigation into the incident is now underway. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, who will win Portugal's general election? The polls are close in what's turning out to be one of the most fascinating contests in years.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more. Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Beijing, China's capital and its cultural nerve center. A modern metropolis with traditional roots. And now it becomes the first city in the world to host both Summer and Winter Olympics. After 14 years, the biggest sporting extravaganza returns to Beijing. Thousands of athletes from around the globe will compete in over 100 events at 3 zones. Cheered on by over 1.4 billion Chinese citizens and millions abroad. CGTN will bring you a ringside view of the historic event. 2022 Beijing Olympics, the games that matter on CGTN. See the difference.
This week on Razor, how long is a second really? We find out from Chinese-American physicist Jun Yi, who's changing the way we measure time.
Together with my students and postdocs in our lab, we have built one of the most precise atomic clocks in the world. So precise that it has a variation of less than 1 second in 15 billion years.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top story. The United States sends troops to Europe as one of its generals says conflict in Ukraine would be horrific. Russia denies plans to invade. Portugal goes to the polls on Sunday in what the analysts say is the closest general election in many years. The Socialist Prime Minister Antonio Costa is seeking a third term. But opinion polls suggest his party is losing ground to the main opposition, Social Democrats. Our correspondent Rahul Pathak reports now from Lisbon.
It's the final day of campaigning, and there's a euphoric atmosphere at this rally, held by Portugal's governing centre-left Socialist Party, or PS as it's known here. The government of Prime Minister Antonio Costa in power since 2015, looking to win a third consecutive term.
Employment continues to grow. The minimum wage is increasing. Pensions are going to be increased. Taxes are going to be lowered. And despite everything, we are going to continue to reduce our deficit and our debt. Yes, together, we will make it happen.
The main obstacle to that third term is the opposition centre-right Social Democrats, or PSD. Many here believe that this election offers them the best chance since 2015 of gaining power.
They want to boost the economy instead of directly reducing taxes for people. They want to reduce it for business instead, so they can create more jobs and hopefully improve the economy.
PSD has a totally different model than the Socialist Party, focused on economic development that makes it possible to improve people's lives.
Now, this election was called back in November last year after the Antonio Costa government failed to get their state budget ratified by Parliament. Now, what makes that state budget so important is that it set out plans and how billions of dollars worth of EU aid was going to be spent in helping Portugal recover from the pandemic. But what's even more significant is the fact that two of Costa's former allies, the Communists and the Left Bloc, both voted against that budget, thus triggering this election. The leader of Portugal's main far-right party, known as Chega, translated in English as Enough, is a former TV sports host André Ventura. Polls indicate that the party he founded just 3 years ago could find itself as the third largest bloc in the 230-seat assembly. And with neither of the two main parties looking like they will win a majority on Sunday, Chega may well hold the key to the Social Democrats forming the next government. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Lisbon.
The Italian President Sergio Mattarella has agreed to serve a second term in office. Italy's ruling parties have increased pressure on the 80-year-old to remain after days of failed attempts to agree on a successor. The presidency is largely ceremonial, but the head of state wields serious power during political crises, from dissolving parliament to picking a new prime minister. Thousands of flights have been cancelled in the United States as parts of the East Coast brace for the worst blizzard in many years. The Northeast, including New York and Boston, are expected to bear the brunt of the snowstorm. 5 states have declared an emergency. The weather forecasters say the storm will intensify rapidly over the next 24 hours. Demonstrators opposing mandatory COVID vaccine passes have marched through Paris. The protest was organised by the French Nationalist Party, Les Patriotes. It comes after new laws took effect barring unvaccinated people from restaurants, bars and other public places. Tennis, and Australians are celebrating Ashley Barty becoming the first woman from the host country to win the Australian Open Singles Championship in 44 years. Barty, who was the top seed, beat the American Danielle Collins 6-3, 7-6. Now, it's one of the world's top winter sports venues, an essential stopover for U.S. athletes heading to the Beijing Olympics. Lake Placid in New York State has a long and distinguished history of both hosting Olympic events and preparing America's medal hopefuls. CGTN's Francis Kuo reports.
The small town of Lake Placid holds some big-time bragging rights.
Athletes from Lake Placid have gone to every Winter Games since the inception of the Winter Games in 1924, and in fact, a Lake Placid native won the first gold medal at the 1924 Games.
So why is that? Well, turning out Olympic-level athletes requires top-notch training facilities, and Lake Placid has them all. Like Mount Van Hoevenberg, an elite training ground for the sports of skeleton, luge, and bobsled. It houses a refrigerated track of 1,500 meters and 16 hair-raising curves, helping riders reach speeds of up to 130 kilometers an hour, and fast-tracking the site to international fame.
The Jamaicans came here, and the Cool Runnings movie and everything, so they learned how to bobsled here. And many athletes from foreign countries have come here for bobsled. There's been Chinese athletes that have trained here for bobsled.
While this track emphasizes speed, this spot is all about height. Lake Placid's Olympic jumping complex brags 90 and 120-meter ski jumping towers.
It's one of the best facilities in the world,
allowing athletes to fly the length of a football field.
It feels like somebody picks you up by the seat of the pants and you're literally playing off and you're flying on a mattress of air.
Larry Stone trained here in the early part of his career. He's a former U.S. ski team coach and now coaching a junior program through the New York Ski Educational Foundation.
This sport is unusual in that it's hard to hop into it at an older age. Even if you're a really good athlete, it's something you've pretty much got to grow up with and get used to it.
These complexes, launching grounds for these 8 to 12-year-olds as possible Olympians.
They just see nothing but unlimited opportunities.
Lake Placid, not only the place to train, but compete. The host of 2 Winter Olympics in 1932 and 1980, and the upcoming World University Games in 2023. Continuing its rich legacy of winter sports for future generations. Francis Kuo, CGTN, Lake Placid, New York.
China is celebrating the Lunar New Year in the city of Guangzhou. An old tradition of dancing lions heralds hopes of health and prosperity. Our correspondent Huang Fei reports.
The sounds of Chinese New Year in Pantang. Lion dances bring in blessings of happiness, health, and prosperity.
Growing up here, I always ran to the sounds of lion dances. I watched my dad perform and became fascinated by it. Nowadays, fewer people are interested in this, but I want to pass it on to the next generation.
Today, all eyes are on these two young lions. Aged 11 and 10, they're the newest stars of the troupe.
I've learned for over 2 years. I saw the adults do it and thought they looked really cool. Different colors represent different personalities. The colorful one is cheerful. The black one means power. I still can't figure out some of the moves. They are really hard.
We have to do the horse stance and a lot of push-ups to build our strength. But if we don't carry on, a piece of culture will be lost.
Venture a tad deeper into the village, and this young craftsman is restoring a different kind of cultural heritage.
I repair broken ceramics for a living. Some of the pieces are no longer made, so they're precious. Others have high sentimental value for the owners. Sometimes I also fix things for the villagers, and in return, they let me try their traditional horseshoe cakes.
Like these pieces of porcelain, being able to bring business into an area of historic significance without displacing the existing inhabitants is a delicate process. In the last few years, the government has been repairing some old buildings and removed a wall that once separated the village from the park.
Today, Pantang is a living museum of Cantonese architecture, with more than 100 indigenous families still living in these traditional brick houses. In recent years, the city has been welcoming new tenants in what's seen as a revival of the area. From artists to musicians to bookstore owners, a generation of culture influencers have started to call this place home, adding new strokes of color to Pantang's vibrant history.
Huang Fei, CGTN, Guangzhou.
Green, grey and blue hydrogen next, and why one of them might deliver the fuel of our future. All that in The Agenda with Stephen Cole, coming up in just a couple of minutes. That's The Agenda with Stephen Cole, right after The World Today at 16:30 GMT here on CGTN. The headlines again. The United States sends troops to Europe as one of its top generals says conflict in Ukraine would be horrific. Russia denies plans to invade. The UK Prime Minister is to visit the Ukraine region and will talk to Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Boris Johnson says he wants to ramp up deterrence to avoid bloodshed. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview. More news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's The Agenda with Stephen Cole. For now, from me, goodbye.